What is your worst experience with bad neighbors? We had some neighbors that used to leave their garbage out in plastic bags the night before garbage day, instead of putting it in a bin. Around here, that's just ringing the dinner bell for raccoons and other critters. Sure enough, come morning there's garbage strewn all over the neighborhood. What the raccoons and skunks didn't spread around, the wind picked up the slack. Some of the people on the street kindly approached the guy and asked him to put his garbage in a bin. He told them to go frick themselves. Thus began the garbage wars. Every morning of garbage day some people on my street would collect all the half-eaten and rotten trash from their lawns and toss it back into the dude's backyard. He would collect it, then dump it back on their lawns. Or cram it into their bushes. People started finding half-eaten burritos and candy wrappers in their mailboxes. The street started to look like a slum. Police were called. Health inspectors. City by law enforcement. Each side was calling in whatever authority they could muster to get their enemy in shit. The dude and his family, amazingly his wife seemed perfectly pleasant, lasted about 8 months then moved. Every once in a while I find a random margarine lid or a piece of styrofoam in my hedge, and my mind goes back to those dark days of war. They were crackheads. They had 2 kids, were physically and verbally abusive to each other, and were hoarders on top of it. Tried to call Child Protective Services and the police over and over and was never taken seriously. They ended up burning down their apartment and caused thousands of dollars in damage to the rest of the apartment building because they were cooking meth. We had to move out, as did many others. The silver lining is that they finally got their kids taken away after that. The matriarch of my crazy neighbors nailed all of the windows shut in their house, then removed the doorknobs and installed several deadbolts. This was to keep her grandkids home while she was at work, and everyone else out. Child welfare stopped by and were okay with this. The kids were able to get one window open without her knowing, and they would usually leave during the day and make it back before she got off work. Eventually, there were maybe a dozen young adults living there too, and they all used the window as the main entrance. It, unfortunately, bordered my driveway, and was mere feet from my house. All hours of the day, people would be out there, wiggling in and out of the window. People got tired of being cooped up and major fights broke out. I regularly heard bodies hitting walls or furniture or fists, yells of "well, stop threatening and get your goddamn gun already." I have PTSD. And it was just day after day of trying to keep myself calm. The kids had a pneumatic BB gun, a look-alike handgun, and one morning shot up my neighbor's car. She left to work at a hospital early in the morning, before first light, and didn't notice. When she shut her car door, all the glass fell out the windows. Later in the morning, he shot out a window in the school across the street. And a bit after that, he shot my husband in the shoulder, when we were outside planting flowers. He kept shooting, even after the police arrived. The police called the matriarch, who unlocked all the deadbolts, took away the kids' guns, and dragged them outside so they could be cuffed and taken away. The youngest was maybe 9. Since no one confessed or ratted, and police weren't sure which of the 3 did it, they were released and not charged. Thankfully this act of physical violence against my husband got them evicted. After tearing up the house, breaking all the windows and ripping out the electrical boxes and punching random holes in the walls, the kids went to the landlord's house with their look-alike handguns and shot up the windows in her house. Again arrested, but being juveniles, no repercussions. A couple of weeks later, her vehicle and garage were firebombed, but no one was charged with that. I'm so glad they are gone. I live in a wonderful neighborhood, not rich by any means, but the most awesome people. But it's hard to enjoy the community with that going on next door. I hope they somehow find some peace with this life. Just straight up rednecks who wanted the full neighbor experience without putting in any effort themselves. It was like they'd moved from some hillbilly commune where you could just demand things of your neighbors. Every day when I got home from school, the 3 youngest kids would bang on our door until we gave them snacks. One of them, when denied snacks, came back and broke our glass door with a hammer. They turned the shared side yard, legally ours but shared because we weren't necessarily using it, into a lumberyard playground where they dug a massive pit for mud wrestling. No bullshit there. Mud wrestling. The second oldest kid, 6 in total, had an old AC air handling unit in the backyard that he was allowed to hit with a sledgehammer when he got angry. He got angry often and at some pretty irregular hours. I ran into him at a bowling alley years after they moved away, got kicked out, went bankrupt. He had a tattoo across his chest that said "Immortal Death" in a black radiant. He also had giant scars all over his back, chest, and arms. He said he woke up in the middle of the highway on Halloween night, all cut up. Who knows if that's true, but if it could happen to anyone, he was the guy. A few more redneck activities because this comment is getting some attention. lighting bottle rockets out of the tailpipe on their dad's truck. The youngest kid got stuck in the mud pit up to his head and they couldn't get him out for hours. On rainy nights they used to put these rusty cots in the front yard and sleep in the rain. That one didn't even register as redneck, felt more like an Addams Family thing to do. They somehow got their hands on what looked like municipal park playground equipment, one of which was a steel slide about 2 stories tall. One of the younger kids took a bike up to the top of it and tried to ride down, but fell over backwards and smacked his head on the metal steps a few times. The mom watched him do it and I specifically remember her saying he's gotta learn somehow after he fell. A bunch of things with my ding-dong neighbor. She had a large dog that hated my older, smaller dog. One day her dog ran into my yard and bit my dog. She did apologize for this one, did not happen again. Neighbor dumped her lawn clippings into my backyard. Had to ask her to stop and clean up her mess. She decided to build a fence. No survey. So I paid for a survey of my property. She started building her fence 3 feet over on my property. I had her stop and remove the fence. She was angry and never rebuilt it. I painted my house. She painted her house, same color. I bought a new car. She bought a new car, same color, same configuration. There's other minor stuff, but that's enough. Odd person. Very odd. The block of flats I used to live in was being converted into Airbnb rooms by the landlord. Me and my wife, were the last residential tenants renting there out of the 14 flats. It was unstaffed, so 99% of the time the rooms were booked by in-call escorts, prostitutes, and drug dealers. For a solid week we had dealers in and out the door, up and down the adjoining stairwell every 30 minutes. One night we saw a black SUV pull up near the front of the property and try to bundle one of the women who was staying in the dealer room opposite ours. She managed to get away. We called the police as we were scared for her safety. They ended up getting a warrant as we told them of our suspicions, and when tallied up with the attempted bundling, the duty sergeant was happy to bust their door in, searched the lot of them and made arrests. The other adjoining room flat had a couple staying in it, got a bit drunk as you do, and we heard them arguing and it getting heated, and at one point some sort of physical violence occurred. Police came again, told the guy to leave and not to return. But he did come back, shouted at her threatening to stab her. A short while later we heard the most terrifying blood-curdling scream and called police again. He went round the back of the property, got in a car, and sped off moments before the police turned up. The final tale was literally on my day off, hearing a knock at the flat's bottom door either every half hour or hourly. Saw Johns with their cash waiting to come up and get their end away with a prostitute who stayed for a few nights in the adjoining flat, the drug-grade one. John would then leave. Not even 5 minutes later she was on to the next one, and I heard everything. Walls were horrifically thin. I hated that place, but it was that or homelessness. We've now lived in our forever home, a nice bungalow in the countryside, for the last year, and the leave-in quiet has been a godsend. My mom has a neighbor who literally looks through her window to try to see into the house. She's had to call the cops on her multiple times. My first instinct is to spray the neighbor with water in the face, like training a dog. She has turned the sprinklers on before while her neighbor was standing out there. She said it was pretty hilarious. Still didn't stop her from coming back, though. I have a schizophrenic neighbor that has believed for years that I am hacking his electronic devices, scanning his phone, harassing, terrorizing him, etc. Over the years he has claimed I've held an old man hostage in my condo, allowed blood to drip from my patio to his, and that I'm a terrible racist. He leaves notes on the inside of his car accusing me of these things. My neighbors create this toxic smoke out of their chimney. We suspect that they are making drugs. Dude pretended to be a reverend but was actually just a filthy freaking hoarder. He insisted on wearing sandals all of the time, and whenever he left his flat, the entire stairwell would stink of century-old unwashed feet. Eventually, the beetles that had infested his flat crawled up and into our kitchen and then everywhere. Took months to get him evicted. Frick that guy. Our current neighbors have 2 dogs they let out into their tiny backyard that borders our driveway. They never, ever pick up the dog poop and it smells like shit. Also, one of the dogs freaks out when she sees us. They mow their lawn maybe 4 times a year. The grass gets so tall, it's taller than the smaller dog. We are putting up a privacy fence next week. I cannot wait. Had a share balcony with a cokehead. She would let her garbage bin with the bag open out on that balcony instead of in her damn kitchen, all summer long. For a reason I'm not sure I understand, this caused my landlord and I to have dozens of flies in our home. Also the never-ending parties with loud music, door slamming, generally inconsiderate asshole. Probably our neighbors in our apartment that just let their damn dog bark all day long on their porch. Like I don't think that dog is ever inside even during the winter until it's nighttime. It's so annoying. We rented a house that had another apartment in the basement. The lady who lived below us kept to herself for the most part, so we didn't see her much. Part of our rental was a detached garage and she asked if she could put small deep freezer in our garage. We were using it for storage, so we were fine with it. After a couple weeks of having her freezer in there, it somehow got unplugged and she came unglued on us and wanted us to pay to replace everything. I understood her frustration, but we hardly ever went into the garage since it was only for storage. In other words, we definitely didn't unplug it and our landlord agreed. But she was pissed. She had a son in college who came home for the summer. During that summer he found a cat and brought it home. His mom said no cats inside, so he would feed the kitten outside. She was pretty wild. He left for school again in the fall and we noticed that the cat was getting very thin. We started feeding her outside in her usual spot. Around Christmas, we bought a bag of cat food and I made a plate of cookies and left them both at our neighbor's front door. The next day they were both back on our porch. Rude. Whatever. We continued to feed the cat because she obviously wasn't feeding her. A few weeks later the cat came to our door crying. She was trying to come inside. Super weird considering she was pretty wild and we had never let her inside before. I let her in and noticed she was pregnant and for sure about to have babies. I made her a little corner and she had babies the next day. We let her stay in the house with us but we knew we couldn't keep her. I went downstairs to talk to our neighbor. She said that her son's cat was a boy, so the cat we had obviously wasn't his. I posted on Facebook to see if anyone was interested in fostering a cat and her kittens because we couldn't keep her. Her son saw my post on Facebook and got super mad at his mom. She then called the cops and said that I stole her cat and lied to her when she confronted me about having the cat in my possession. It was the stupidest, most frustrating thing that had ever happened to me as far as neighbors go. Guy owned 6 cars and kept them all parked on the street in a very congested block of apartments. Spent hours tending to them, and they somehow always looked rustier when he was done. If a leaf landed on one of his cars he would accuse the neighborhood of intentionally placing leaves on his car to annoy him. Did you have similar experiences? Share your story in comment section.